I've hired Philip less than 6 months ago, and I was like, "Hey man, let's do the podcast at 9:45." He's like, "Nah, I can't do that." And I'm like, "What? What do you mean you can't do that?" He's like, "The first available time I got is 9:45." And I'm like, "Okay." All right, we are back. Built by Vitality. Today's episode sponsored by
Vitality Grind.
It's a shameless plug. I'm going to do it. The strawberries and cream.
Oh, here we go.
I'm telling you, if you guys have not tried this, your life is just, it's incomplete. It's like, I can't even explain it.
I feel that way about the Ganassi grind.
Where's yours?
Well, you said we're going to have grinds, but you came in, sat down, you had a grind. So I guess I'll wait till after.
Got him. Okay. My name is Steve Pinkerton. That is
Philip Lewis.
Philip Lewis. Today's episode, we're going to get right into it. We're going to break down the lessons I learned in 3 different stages of my life. We're going to break those stages up into me as a kid, me in the Marine Corps, and me as a entrepreneur or business owner. So if you want to look at on a micro level, you're talking about as a kid from the time I was born until, we'll call it graduating college. That's a long.
How long did that take you?
Almost 5 years.
Okay.
But I made it in 4.
Okay.
Made it in 4. But I wasn't I know you would think I'd be like a college academic standout. I wasn't. I really wasn't. I barely graduated. I think I graduated because I paid tuition. I think that's what happened. But anyway, so that'll be the kid range. And then the Marine range, I was 8 years, so that's kind of an easy time designation. And then as a business owner, the last 11 years. And we'll break them down. This will be a 2-part series because the word on the street is people think I'm long-winded.
I don't think that.
Well,
You're attentive to detail, and you get the point across. I'd rather have too much than not enough.
I agree with you. I think some people don't agree. So I'm going to try and shorten this one into 2 shorter episodes.
2 40-minute episodes.
I told Philip we're going to have a little short episode today. He's like, I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, get out my extra memory card.
Yeah. So, obviously when we talk about these, the lessons I learned as a kid, I might not remember all the things that went into that. As a Marine, it was really easy because there's 1,000 things that the Marine Corps taught me. So, then it becomes difficult just trying to pick 3 or 4 that I want to talk about. I've got a couple stories that I can share that I'm sure Philip will have to do his best to keep me on track. But I really enjoy. I think that's how I pick things up, is when I hear it attached to a story and I hear it kind of in that version, I remember things a little bit easier. So hopefully that works for you. And as an entrepreneur, that's the most recent. That's like right now, the last 11 years, I've learned a lot of new things that I think I never even thought about before until you're a business owner. So I think that'll be kind of hopefully applicable to a lot of you guys out there that are watching, whether you're an employee, whether you're a business owner, or whether you're none of the above.
Things like how much further your business would be now with somebody like me the whole time.
Yeah, I would probably say that I'd be homeless, maybe living in someone's basement if I would have met Philip.
You have some
10
cool
years
lights
ago.
though at your basement.
Okay, so let's get into it. As a kid, if I had to break it down and say, okay, what do I remember as being the biggest life lessons that I learned? I think I was very lucky. My dad was really hard on us. I have an older brother that's 18 months older, and then there's a gap, like, I don't know, a 10-year gap between my little brother and then another couple years between me and my little sister. So there was really kind of 2 sets of families, me and my brother, and then I tease my little brother. He was adopted, but he really wasn't. He's actually my blood brother. But I was really out of the house by the time he was, old enough to be in school or whatever. So when my brother and I were growing up, my dad was tough. I mean, he was heavy-handed. We definitely were in the camp that spanking was okay, with a hand, with a belt, with any type of object, anything. Yes, and I'm very thankful now looking back because of the way my dad and my mom raised me, with the understanding of that there's consequences to everything that happened. if there was something I did and it was out of line, then there was a consequence to that action. And I think learning that at a young age is super important. And I think that, to be quite honest, I think we're missing that now. I think there's a lot of people that don't have consequences for their actions, and that's why we see this social media frenzy of, people think that they can go on social media and speak to people in a way that's just unacceptable. Like if someone would have spoken to, if I spoke that way back in the late '80s and '90s, you were going to get punched in the face. Like
Yeah.
that's just the way it was.
Yeah.
And now,
Now they just have a talking.
yeah, you can talk and listen. I'm not here to tell you that you should spank your kids. That's not the topic I'm getting at. If you can convey consequences efficiently to your kids without spanking them, great. That works for you. It would not have worked for me, and probably not for Philip.
No.
If you wanted to sit down and talk about my feelings and my emotions and put me in the corner or whatever, yeah, I'll
I
play
probably
along
would have
with
been
that.
a repeat offender.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely would have been. I needed I needed that fear a little bit, and we can talk about that later because I think that fear is what kind of drove me, even in the Marine Corps and in my business world, the fear of whatever it might be, and now it might be the fear of someone else doing it better than I am, and it kind of keeps you from getting complacent. So you'll see this kind of fear track all the way through each stage of my life. But so consequences was a big one. And at the time, you think back, I didn't really understand it. No one does. No kid, no teenager is like, man, I'm so glad that my dad, beat me up as a kid
Yeah.
or was so hard on me as a kid or,
It's when you're late 20s, early 30s, you're like, God, my parents were right.
yeah, it's usually, I would go one further and say it's when you have kids yourself. Like when you have,
I don't know.
it's coming soon. It's coming soon.
That's a different podcast.
But I think that's when it hits, when you're like, gosh, this whole being a parent thing is really hard. And parents get the short end of the stick. I never gave my parents the benefit of the doubt. Growing up, I thought I had the hardest parents in the world, and that's just the way it was. So that to me set the stage and the foundation for a lot of everything else that came with it, was the ability to understand consequences and learn that at a very young age. The second one I'll brush on this was, not to be late. There's nothing worse than being late, and I think that there's so much that goes into that. We could probably run an entire podcast on what being late means and some of the characteristics that go along with that. For me, it was simple. When my older brother got his license, I thought it was the coolest thing in the world because I had to ride everywhere. On the flip side of that, it was probably the worst situation for him because what 16-year-old wants to have his 14-year-old little brother tagging along with him everywhere? So my mom would make him take me everywhere, take me to school, and I remember being late, and I'd walk out in the garage and the car would be gone. It'd be halfway down the driveway. I'm sprinting. It's 20 below in northern Michigan, slipping on the ice and bags up everywhere. And, you just like the movies, you go to put your hand in the door and he speeds up and goes up 20 yards. And this happened all the time. But sooner or later, I realized if I got out to the car 15 minutes before he did, I'd just be sitting in the car waiting for
He
him.
had no choice.
And he got in and he was almost upset that I was doing it right. But anyway.
Yeah, at least your mom let you go with your older brother. My mom wouldn't allow my younger brother to ride with me. She didn't trust
She
me.
didn't trust you.
Yeah.
That's
At least I had trust.
that makes sense. I can see that.
Hey, I'm going to take Mitchell with me, go grab something to eat. Nah. Just bring it back for him. Tell him what you want. He couldn't go with me.
I love that. Now, there was one more story. When I was in college, I played football for a small college in Michigan called Albion, and I was barely mediocre. I was not a starter by any stretch. I was a backup tight end, and which is fine. Look, I get it. But on Sundays, we'd play on Saturdays. On Sundays, we'd have film, the whole team. And there were about 40 of us in a fraternity house that all played football together. And usually on Sundays, it'd be this mass. We were about 300 yards down this long sidewalk into the football complex. And me and my roommate, who was a starting running back, he was a little more important than I was.
Just a little.
Just a little. We were walking.
You had to keep him hydrated though from the bench.
Yeah, I was good. I was a good water guy, you know.
That's where we learned how to make all these good shakes.
See?
Just practice on the sidelines.
I planted the seed early.
That's right.
And
grow where you're planting.
We were walking down this sidewalk, and nobody else is around us. And we both, at the same time, we looked at each other, and we both realized that we had to have gotten the time wrong. And we didn't run, we didn't jog, because it was like we were an hour late. It's not like you're 30 seconds late. We were an hour late. And that feeling in the pit of my stomach, I can still vividly remember the sounds. I remember it was a fall day. I remember everything about it. And I remember just walking in, and we were just getting ready to open the door to the film room. And I just looked at my buddy Sean, and I was like, dude, what are we doing? And we opened that door, and it was, an old building. The whole thing creaks, and it was like, and everybody's head turned, all 70 players and coaches. And it was just
an hour late.
You couldn't have got it any worse. And I remember the offensive line coach was a tough guy. And man, did he have a piece of my rear end, man. It was like a week straight.
Your consequences probably wasn't as bad since you wasn't like an important player.
Yeah,
It's probably he was more mad at you for he probably thought you caused the other guy to be late.
I was the bad influence, I guess. But yeah, so that was after that. I think about that on a monthly basis, at least a few times a month. It's not something that I'll ever forget. So I think things like that, when you make a mistake like that, as long as it's burned into your brain, then it could be a good thing. Mistakes aren't always bad. It's when you repeat them over and over and over again, and that's the problem. We're repeat offenders when it comes to these mistakes. Then it becomes an issue. So I look at the consequences. I look at not being late, and I think that's an important skill, because there's a lot of people that are late to things, and I'm telling you, it will affect whatever meeting you're going to if you show up 10 minutes late. It just will.
Like when we were shooting the podcast the other day, you said, hey, let's meet at 9:45. I said, hey, man, I don't know if I can do that. Let's try 9:45. But could you imagine if I'd have got there at like 9:43? I'd have set up the light, the camera. It'd be like the first podcast where the white balance wasn't set and we look like Oompa Loompas. Then we go to Smurfs. Like everything was off because I was in a hurry because you were 3 offices down. You're like, oh, podcast time. You sat down, put the headset on. I was like, 10:04, record.
I've hired Philip less than 6 months ago, and I was like, hey, man, let's shoot a podcast at 9:45. He's like, I can't do that. And I'm like, what? What do you mean you can't do that? He's like, the first available time I got is 9:45. And I'm like, okay, here we go.
Got it.
So I think the third and final thing that I'll talk about is talent versus training. And this kind of goes back and segues back into my sports career, where I was never the most talented person by any stretch. I just loved training. And I think that I learned at an early age that you could outwork anybody. Anybody can be outworked. I might not have the same amount of talent in something as Philip, but I can outwork him in the weight room. I can outwork him on the practice field, wherever it was. And there's a value to that. People see a value to that. And it's funny. Nate Agnew is a guy that always uses sports analogies, and he's always like, would you rather be this or who would you be? And you're always looking back at old people that have played sports. And you always get asked that question, like, if you were a basketball player, who's your game like? And someone's always like, oh, I'm like Kobe Bryant. And I'm like, someone else is like, oh, I'm like Michael Jordan. Or, and you sit there and you're like, what do you mean? No, you're not.
No, you're not.
Someone
like
asked me, Nate's like, who do you think you play like? I didn't even skip a beat. I play like Brian Cardinal. Now, you don't know.
Is that the guy on the Gatorade bottle?
No. You don't know who Brian Cardinal
Steve George.
is. Brian Cardinal was this guy that he played for Purdue. Like, just when you think about people that play for Purdue, you just think about people that hustle, and Brian Cardinal was this big, tall guy that he was balding at like age 20. And he was the guy that was like diving into the scores table. He would just outwork and out hustle everybody.
Wasn't that good, but he just outworked
No, I
everybody.
didn't say he wasn't that. I'm not saying that I wasn't that good. I'm just saying that
He hustled.
That I think my game was on the training floor, on the practice floor, and that's where, you know, you don't want to be playing against a guy that does that. It's just not a fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun to play sports against that guy. Well, that was me, and I think that, and that really taught me a lot, because in every phase after that, I realized that, you know, I'm never going to be the most talented person in anything that I do, but I do think, and I believe it to my core, that I have the ability to outwork anybody. I will. I'll stay up later. I'll get up earlier. I'll do more work. I'll be more disciplined. Whatever it takes, I'm willing to do that. And I think I'm willing to suffer more than most people. And I think that's what makes up for this lack of talent that I've had my whole life. So I think that those three pieces are what I remember the most about my childhood. And I think probably my parents had the most to do with that, but a lot of that was through sports as well. Like, that's why I'm such a big believer in high school sports, and I hate to see these kids miss out on these seasons of sports right now. It's such an incredibly important time, formative time for these kids to be a part of a team and to learn how to win the right way, learn how to lose the right way. So luckily, I grew up loving sports, and my parents were supportive of that. So that, I think, helped shape me before I got in the Marine Corps. Now, switching gears, you know, the 8 years in the Marine Corps, you know, I was certainly a different person before I went in the Marine Corps versus when I got out of the Marine Corps. And it really is tough to pinpoint all the different lessons that I learned, but I'll talk about a couple of them here, and then we'll break into that next episode here. The first one is accountability. I think the Marine Corps does an amazing job at making you understand that you are going to be held accountable for everything that comes out of your mouth. You are going to be accountable for your actions. If you say you're going to do something, you better do it. In the Marine Corps, your Marines, once they realize that you truly care about them, man, they will do anything. They are the most loyal, most incredible group of men I've ever been around, and all they want to know is that you care about them. That's it. And as long as you do what you say, that's being accountable to those guys. And that was what was so important to me, is not being their friend, but knowing that they respected the decisions that I was going to make, and that they trusted that every decision that I made was going to be in their best interest. And if that isn't a life lesson that you take with you into, you know, sure, the decisions that I make that affect Philip do not have the same consequences that they did when I was in the Marine Corps, but it's the same exact concept. If Philip doesn't trust me that I'm going to make a decision that's best for our group of people at Vitality, then he's at the wrong place, and I'm the wrong person to be leading the gym. So I think if you can look through it in that lens and say, I have to hold myself accountable, I have to, and the same thing, lead by example is kind of the same, the same breath. I think, would you say you can combine those two?
Yes.
You know, if you're accountable, I would say that you're leading by example. You're doing the things that, you know, you can't ask people to do things that you're not willing to do, and that you've never done.
It's like I trust you here 100% with decisions you make. I've come to learn, they're like when we're working out and stuff, I feel like, hey, Philip, you know, maybe you do the RX weight today. I'm starting to learn that maybe I shouldn't trust you on some of that. But other than that, 99.9% of the time, he's right.
Philip was like 1 month into his full-time employment here, and he's like, I've done more Metcons in the past month than I have in the previous 2 years. So,
yep, I've PR'd about 73 times, and we're only halfway through the year.
So if you see this chair move and it's actually a wheelchair that gets put in here, we just know that maybe Philip should have slowed down a little bit.
Yep.
So, you know, the accountability piece, the lead by example piece, I think those are very, very vital they were extremely vital in the Marine Corps, but just as important outside of that in any area of your life that you want to excel in, you have to have those two things. And that's something only you can answer that. Only you can know, am I being accountable, and am I leading by example? And I'll tell you, most of the time, if you're not doing that, one of those two things, you're going to hear about it. You're going to have a problem. You're going to have an issue. Maybe you're going to have more turnover in your employees because they don't enjoy working for you in that capacity. In the Marine Corps, it was very simple. It was very easy to know if your Marines trusted you or not, because the word got around really fast with the guys they didn't trust. And I remember thinking to myself, man, I really want to set a good example, and I want these guys to respect me as a leader.
I think that's going back to the gym, because we're here all day. You do really well in the workouts. A lot of times you take the board. So when you're coaching a class, they're like, okay, Steve, this is how he did this workout, how he paced it, the rep scheme he did. So maybe I should listen to him because he knows what he's talking about, lead by example. But then you take somebody like, I don't know, like Spencer, he hasn't been here long. If he's coaching a class and he gives them some pointers and stuff, they might not trust him as much because he's usually way down on the whiteboard for the day. So they're going to take more advice from somebody that's leading by that example, doing what they're told or whatever.
I would say that you should start your clock, because you've got about 9 days until this episode drops and Spencer hears that, and then it's going to be game on when he's going to be in your ear.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I do agree. I mean, in all seriousness, when you've got a coach that is doing some of the classes, it changes the dynamic of that greatly, because now they know, okay, he's suffered. I'm getting ready to do the same thing he's already done, so I'm going to listen to what he says and how it felt. There's nothing worse than someone that doesn't do CrossFit workouts, coaches a class, tries to explain what it's going to feel like when he has no idea. He doesn't know what the strength progression did. He didn't know what the previous 2 days felt like. So I think that's a problem for sure. The next one that we'll jump into is a comment that one of my COs, my commanding officers, gave me when I was deployed. My second deployment. His name is Colonel Renforth. He was a lieutenant colonel at the time. Now he's a brigadier general. He told me to grow where I was planted, and it came about because when we were getting ready to deploy the second time, I was given the opportunity to lead this small group of Marines. We were going to handpick this group there was about 18 to 20 of us, and we were going to go be a quick reaction force for one of these bases overseas. And we got to handpick our group, and we got to train for 3 to 4 months. It was an amazing opportunity. We had awesome group of guys. We deploy, and we get to Al Asad, which is kind of like the jumping off point to all these different little forward operating bases that they called FOBs. And we get on our helicopters, and we get shuttled out to our camp called Korean Village. And we land. Within 2 minutes of landing, a captain came up and said, "Hey, Lieutenant, you're at the wrong spot." And I just knew, in the Marine Corps, everything changes. Every 2 seconds, the plans change. And I just knew that he was probably right, and things were about to go sideways a little bit for what I thought we were going to be doing. So we were kind of stuck in purgatory for 3 or 4 days until they got transportation to take us to another place. And we actually met up with the rest of our artillery battery in a place called Rawa. And we landed at like 1 a.m. We get off these helicopters, and a senior lieutenant that I'm really close with now, his name was Dave. Dave comes up and says, "Hey, man, drop your stuff. Meet me in the command, the COC, which is the Command Operations Center." He said, "You got some bad news. Just hear me out." And so I'm like, okay, here we go. Drop my bag, go up to the COC, and they're like, "Hey, we're short a fires guy. We need you to take over that role." And the fires guy is the fire supervisor. He is in charge of all the artillery counterfire, illumination missions, mortars, air support, whatever it is. But you sit inside this command center for 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, staring at a computer screen and looking at a map. And it was exactly opposite of what we had trained for the past 4 months. And so I was very, very mad, disappointed, frustrated, whatever.
Was this before you were really good at handling your emotions?
This was
or
way
after?
before I was good at handling my emotions.
So how did you handle
Not
this?
good.
Okay.
Not good. And I pouted like a little second grader for probably 3 weeks. And my boss at the time was the colonel was Colonel Renforth, and he was the best leader I've ever seen in the Marine Corps, hands down to this day. I have more respect for that guy. He could call me today and be like, "Hey, Steve, I need you to come down to Texas." I'd stop what we're doing right now. I'd get in a car and drive to Texas. I mean, he's the guy. He's just a massive, just wide as a house, bald head. And when he walks into a room, you listen.
It's kind of like me.
A lot like you.
Yeah.
A lot like you, minus about 100 pounds. And so we're doing that. We're going through that, and he sees me, and it's just kind of it was the 1,000th paper cut, death by 1,000 paper cuts. He had put up with it for long enough, and man, he called me into his office, and he just let me have it. I mean, just told me I was being selfish and language I can't repeat. And just made me feel about an inch tall. And he was right. Every single thing he said. I was letting all these Marines down because I was just being a baby about it. And he said, "You know what? You got to grow where you're planted. It doesn't matter what you're doing. I don't care if you're cleaning toilets. You're going to be the best at it that you can be." And he was so right. And so I changed my attitude that day. And 2 weeks later, one of his platoon commanders, one of his Marines, lost his life in Rawa, and he called me in his office and said, "Hey, do you want to go take over this guy's platoon? I'm short a guy." And he said, "Before you answer, make sure you understand what the question is." And I said, "Yes, sir. I'll absolutely do that." And he said, "Okay, go pack your stuff, and I'll introduce you to Major Quinlan." And Major Quinlan was the company commander at the time. So 15 minutes later, I come back, and I'm sitting in Colonel Renforth's office, and Major Q is sitting right next to me, just like you are. And Colonel Renforth says, "All right, Q, Pink's going to be your platoon commander." And Major Q didn't even look at me. He looked right back at Colonel Renforth and said, "Nah, we don't want him. We don't need him." And I was like, "Oh, man," I adjusted myself a little bit in the seat, kind of sat up a little straighter. I was a big guy. And I was like, "Man, I've never been told I wasn't wanted." I might not have
Except
been
your brother
Yeah.
taking you to school.
There you go.
Or the football team
Flashback.
wanting to play. So
Thanks for bringing that up.
You're welcome.
Yep. So I'm like, and maybe I wasn't the first guy picked in kickball, but I was never the last guy. And now here I am, like the last guy getting picked, like nobody wants me. And so they went back and forth, and it was getting pretty aggressive. They'd known each other for a decade. They'd served together for many years.
So they're sitting there arguing about if they want you or not.
Yeah. And finally, Sparky looks at Major Q and is like, "Hey, listen, it's my decision. He's going to be your platoon commander. End of story." Q's like, "Roger that, sir." Gets up, looks at me, "Meet me by the vehicles in 10 minutes. If you're not there, I'm out." I said,
"Oh, it's my brother
"Roger,
again."
sir. Here I go again." And, man, I'll tell you, I walked down to those vehicles. Whew. We got into that LAV, the light armored reconnaissance vehicle. And, man, we were driving. It was like sundown. And this is another vivid memory. And I can remember driving out through the middle of the desert into the city of Rawa as the sun's going down. And I remember thinking to myself, what in the world am I doing? So
I'd like to be back in that little room again with the computers.
yeah, give me that room with the hot chow. So with that, we're gonna stop this episode. I'm gonna leave you a little bit of a cliffhanger. I'll tell you how that story ends on our next episode. So hopefully you enjoyed this one enough to tune in to the next one. Until next time, I'm Steve Pinkerton.
Philip Lewis.
Built by Vitality. We'll see you soon.